Does anybody know what they are? Does anybody have an idea? Did anybody ever use them? Kat, did you ever have a situation where you had to go pull up open records from a township?
No, I haven't, but I am familiar with it.
Okay. It's usually abbreviated OPRA. It's OPRA. And what that does, if you have a client who's looking for a particular type of use, whether it's residential, mixed use, especially in commercial, whether there's been extensive repairs or whether there was any really history to the house, you can actually go to the township. You could fill out this paperwork. There's a small nominal fee for copies if you want the copy. Obviously, you're gonna need the copies for your records, but you can actually go to each township. You could find out. Now, what do you think would be the need for this? To go pull out an OPRA report on a house. And I can tell you, there's a lot of reasons now. The main reason is we're seeing these flips. We're seeing these flips, and they are really flops that they're selling on the market. I mean, they need, they're doing really poor work. It's discretionary whether they're pulling out any permits for electric, any permits for plumbing, any permits at all. Certain townships call for whole home inspections. In fact, Cherry Hill just
set it up. You tell anybody.
So that's something.
I came here like 2 weeks ago. I was like, "Why is this door not open?" Because Trish asked me if he wants something good. I said, "No, let Devin do it because I don't want to be in charge of that." So he sets it, doesn't tell anybody about it.
Hey, Chris, could you mute yourself for a second? Thank you. Thanks, Chris. So what happens is, you have to make sure that you're checking these records. So the liability on these types of sales is pretty crucial. So you might have a buyer who has a bunch of questions, wants to know if there's work, because clearly now you have a seller's disclosure and there's no marked boxes when anything was done, but you see a new hot water heater, you see a new furnace. I mean, we had a situation, one of our associates was selling a retired fire marshal a house out in Galloway Township. And he looked at it, from his training, 30 some years as a fire marshal. He looked at the hot water heater and he said, it's not installed properly. The venting's not right. And that seller argued, up and down. We had to put in, it was an emergency situation. He goes, I just want you to go get a permit. And, rebuttal, pushback. And at the end of the day, when I spoke to the agent, I said, listen, I said, go to the township, pull up, go see if they pull the record, have them pull the record, see if they pull the permit. The vendor never pulled a permit. So that way we were able to go to the agent and say, listen, we really want you to go get a licensed plumber to go issue a permit and make sure that this is right. And this, keep in mind, this argument is over a 1 or 2 year hot water heater, only to find out that the hot water heater was installed incorrectly. It was letting carbon monoxide come into the house, which is a fire hazard. And it's a dangerous substance coming in that everyone was breathing for a couple of years. So, well, all of a sudden that becomes a big deal now, right? So the buyers, he wouldn't go to closing, and the seller was like, we're going to just go to another deal. And they said, well, we had to go get a lawyer. And at the end of the day, they paid for the lawyer and they paid for the installation of a brand new hot water heater because it was defective and installed incorrectly. So those are the situations that come up to play, but more so when you want to pull an OPRA, it's important to know that there's a lot of liability. When we walk into a township office, we think that we're going in and these people, we're looking for the building inspector, we're looking for the contract manager, we're looking for, whoever was going to give us some information to help our clients make a decision. So if you have some deed restrictions that are on plots of land, they may be at the township level and they may have been then. And now all of a sudden the township shares the records that they have, but there's been changes since. And we go as agents and we say, hey, listen, this is good. You could do whatever you could do what you want on this piece of ground. And the township said it's okay. But what happened is, and what's happened in cases where, I've seen fees paid out of the pockets, is what's happened is the
Yeah,
agents
I don't know why that girl scheduled that closing.
Hey, Deb, could you just
Reschedule
mute
it for the
yourself?
17th.
Could
It's not gonna
everybody,
be done by the 17th.
hey, Deb,
I just sent you amendments to honor before the 26th.
Debbie,
Okay.
Debbie?
yep, you, could you mute yourself? Because we can hear
Oh
you.
my gosh.
There you go. All right. So what happens is, you go pull up that the township pulls up that information, you share that with your buyer, buys the property. They want to build an out barn and they find out that there's a provision that was set forth afterwards with the paperwork that was never submitted to the township. Okay. So you're going to go back to the client and you're going to give them that information and they say, listen, we're suing you because you gave us that information that we could build this pole barn. So now you find out, you go and say, well, I went to the township said we could. Well, the township's records didn't reflect the new changes in ordinance that went into effect on that property. So the first thought is, can I go sue the township? And the answer is no, because they're not responsible for any information they give you. So my point is, be very careful when you do this for clients. You're best having the client go to the township because the client will then take that information as fact or whichever and think that the township's going to be responsible. At the end of the day, the township won't be responsible for you or your client or anybody else because they're only going to give you what they have and you can't sue them for giving you misinformation, which is going to be detrimental to you because they're still going to sue you for giving you information. So just be very careful. Always try and get the client. You can make the suggestion, I'll go with you, but I really would like you to hear this information directly from the township. Does that make sense? Have you guys ever been in this situation? Anybody here? No? Gina, have you ever had to go to the township for an Oprah?
Yeah, we do it a lot. We'll do them online. You submit online and
Correct.
they have a short amount of time to get back to you.
Right.
Time frame, 10 days. So you get it back pretty quickly.
You can. Certain townships will let you do it online. Certain townships want you to come in person. You really need to know, but it's really important especially if you have a buyer driving for those facts. I think in this market right now with a lot of people working from home, what's going to come back into play probably is the Bulk Sales Act. Is everyone familiar with the Bulk Sales Act and how that works? No. Okay. There's some liability there. So some tax ramifications that the seller may owe prior to selling the property. So, these items are going to come into play. So you definitely want to spend some time researching bulk sales. If you do have a buyer, it's always a good suggestion to get them working with an attorney that's familiar with real estate. Because if you're showing a house and you can see that the seller of that property looks like they're working out of the house, looks like they're doing transactions, it looks like they're maybe they have some tenants if it's a multi-family situation. You want to make sure that you pull up a Bulk Sales Act and that form goes to the state. So if you're doing a 3 or 4 week or 5 week closing, the time frame is not realistic if you need a Bulk Sales Act or if you need you need the paperwork to come in from the township. So build yourself a little bit of a window so you have a buffer with time so you could make sure you can have enough time to explore these ventures. The other is just realistically is just making sure you're limiting your liability. And as I said earlier on the first call, getting an attorney involved, especially in this time frame, is really important. It kind of limits your thresholds. It kind of puts you're still negotiating, you're still putting all those terms together on a contract, and you're having the attorney review them and okay those contracts. And then you're you're bypassing the attorney review in most cases. We had a situation and I know it, I could tell you it cost us $35,000 at the time. And this is years ago, where we were selling 4 houses, or actually 5, and they were going to have a horse trail. And that's why I say, they were going to have a horse trail. Agents went in, they went to the township. Township, yep, that's the way those plans were approved. So we're good with that. That buyer wanted to put a horse on that property, right? Only to find out like 5 years after that land was approved that way, they had a zoning change because of the wetlands, and somebody spotted a spotted owl. So now we have an endangered species. So somebody thought, I don't want new construction. So they found a dangerous species in those woods someplace. Somebody saw it. Nobody has a picture of it, but somebody saw it that was important enough to make a zoning change. We built that, we were involved with marketing the houses. Builder built the houses. We market it that way. We had the buyer and the agent go to the township, and we still cut a check out for $35K. And I know the guy built the pool because he's a chiropractor, and I ride by it all the time and say, that's our pool. I feel like using it and never was able to. So you really got to be careful. I mean, even though you want to do as much right as possible, always think liability. We're easy targets, and we go to these townships. They don't sue the township because they know they can't get money from the township. So what they do is they sue realtors, because what do realtors have? Realtors have E&O insurance. So they're coming at you, and they're going to include everybody. It's kind of like making sure everybody's warm in a cold day under a blanket. So they're going to include us, and it's going to end up costing you not only the money, the $2,500 deductible, but also the time, depositions, doing the various reports, giving them the information that they need, trying to limit your liability as much as possible. So, just go cautiously with this. Is anyone doing new construction at all, or doing any spec building? And maybe not on this call. You just really want to make sure that you lawyer up. I mean, it's the best way to limit your liability. So with that being said, I think that I don't want to talk about too much, but with this Oprah, I mean, as long as everybody understands what that is, obviously making sure that you understand what a bulk sales act is, I think that's going to be important. Is anybody having, I should say, if we're in a multiple bid situation, is anybody foregoing inspections? Is anybody doing that right now with their business practice as you're making offers?
No.
Have you ever heard of that? I mean, what we're seeing now in a lot of offers is they're not subject to the home inspection paragraph. So you're typically buying the house as is, where is, and it's only for informational purposes. Does anybody know what that means on a liability end? It's huge. So what happens in paragraph 43, we're starting to see that the home inspection is only for principal purposes only. Okay, the property's being conveyed as is. Buyer can have a home inspection. So what happens if the home, you have that paperwork, you won the final and best, that contract has that provision in there under paragraph 43. The buyer does a home inspection for his principal purposes only and finds there's a major structural crack in the foundation. Are we going to hold his feet to the fire and make him buy the house? It's possible, but I think you're going to be a discrepancy, because the seller, it's going to be hard for the seller to say, I didn't know about that and I lived there for 20 years. So it's going to come back. So there's a lot of things going on right now that just don't make sense, and a lot of my mindset, because when we're doing that, like even when I have this last couple of working with, we were giving up the home inspection, but I already knew the home was inspected previously. I said, I don't know if I would ever buy a home without a home inspection. I mean, I want to know if the house is structurally sound. I want to know if the components are there that are in place, that are working. I want to make sure there's no roof leaks. I'm sending somebody up in the attic because I'm not going down. I'm sending somebody in the crawl space because I'm not going down. But you got to have somebody doing it. So I think that we have to, this trickery going on right now is a little bit dangerous for buyers. And I think buyers have a lot more rights, not only at closing, going into closing, but post-closing. So they're not going to give up those abilities. Yes, Laura, you have a question?
Yeah. So if they say it's for informational only, but can you use that to negotiate some of the costs at closing?
Well, you can't, because you're buying that for informational purposes only, and meaning that the seller knows that seller's understanding he's selling the house as is.
Right.
And so with that being said, how are you going to go back and say you go through a final and best situation you gave up that right to negotiate, but you didn't give
Okay.
up the right to inspect.
But then you don't give up the right to leave the deal if there's something that crucial like a crack in the foundation?
Well, that's where it becomes a discrepancy, because
Right.
what they're saying in the contract, which is a legal binding document, I'm buying the house as is. So I'm going to be a big boy and a big girl, and I'm going to buy the house, and I'm going to just take care of it. But I think on the reality side is if you find that out in disclosure, you're going to come back to the seller under the seller's disclosure, and you're going to say, well, you didn't disclose that there was a crack. So you see where this
Okay,
is going?
I see what you're saying.
You close up that contract, and then you find something like that, and it's wide open again.
Okay.
So
Mike, isn't there something in the contract that of course I don't have it up in front of me,
no problem.
says that you have a right to get out of the deal if there is water intrusion or an electrical issue or
there
a plumbing issue?
There is, but what we're talking about, Jill, is when the buyer gives up those rights to get a deal.
Oh, I see.
That deal, because they're giving up the right to do the home inspection, even though that's under paragraph 19, I believe it is.
Right,
It does describe all those incidences where you can have an out or negotiable. Because keep in mind, even our state contract is an as-is contract. There's no question about that. It says in multiple spots. However, there are major components that it wants to cover and leave and make sure that the buyer is or a seller is actually, conveying. I'll give you, I thought you were raising your hand, Lori, sorry about that. I want to make sure that the seller is conveying a house that's properly functioning. So, but what, the point that I'm making today is we have to tread carefully when we're giving up those rights, because they're not, a buyer's not going to hold back when they go to court and they say, well, my agent thought it was a great idea for me to buy this house without a home inspection. Amnesia will come in 100% of the time and say, I said you could. I didn't say you have to, but it's going to be conveyed and taken down the road where you told them the best way to buy this house. You gave professional advice as a realtor, you're licensed, you have E&O insurance to buy this house without a home inspection. And I'm telling you, I personally think it's going to be a nightmare in the months to come. I really do. And I'm involved with a lot of them myself.
What about using that as negotiation though? Because if there is something majorly wrong with the house, it now has to be disclosed to the next buyer and they're going to have a problem with that. So why wouldn't they work out a deal with the current buyer if the buyer was still interested in buying the home?
They possibly could, and I think, and I think that's the provision that's really the point that's not being said, because I think you have to trip into the deal. The deal is happening. You get your inspection times. You have 14 days after 3-day attorney review, and you do your inspection and you reveal at that point. I don't think it's a way of giving it up. I really don't like it. In fact, when I'm working with two young couples, I got another one coming in from Seattle on Thursday. I don't want to, as-is houses are really tough because the liability still continues post-closing, as I said earlier. So
Right.
Kelly, you're right. It's not going to go away. But
Right.
and the seller, now you ask yourself, well, and this is one of these things where, when they kick something down the road and all of a sudden the people move in, everyone's happy. And they go, those buyers who bought that seller's house, they go to a house party because what do neighbors do? They invite you, hey, why don't you come over and have a cocktail? After COVID, like life used to be a year ago, they invite you over for a little picnic and you say, hey, did those people ever tell you, what do they do with that water they used to get in the basement every time it rained? Guess what? You get a phone call from some lawyer who's going to say, hey, you never told them that the house got water every time it rained. And it's a huge issue because now it's hearsay. It travels down the road and it comes to you again, and it always circles back. So doing it right's the best thing. I mean, I just have a hard time telling people or advising people not to do a home inspection. I mean, it's just good, Gina.
So Mike, on the listing end, because I'm on the listing end a lot.
Yeah.
What I like to do when I talk to my sellers about as-is contracts is we have to offer fair dealing to the buyer. So we're going to leave the paragraph in there and give him the right to cancel the contract if he's really unhappy after his home inspection. and then we'll move on to the next buyer.
Correct.
But what we want to avoid is the laundry list of repairs. They just paid 15 grand over the asking price. Now they want it back towards repairs. That should be the purpose of it. But I like leaving the buyer the option to cancel. So once they know what they're getting, then they have a chance to say, okay, I'm moving forward.
Right. And that is a good point. But, you know, one thing you can do now, if it's like I have an estate that we put on it, and I really wanted to have just the investor pool in it. I didn't want to deal with homeowners nickel and diming. So I did a lot of things that I knew would put it in the investment pool, was really taking the carpet out, taking the patio out. I wanted everyone to see exactly what they're dealing with an estate. And even with that, I still have people thinking they're going to come and do a mortgage. And I said, you can't. I said, you can go check with your lender. I'm 10 out of 10 on it. You're not, there's not going to be an exception for that. Unless it's a portfolio loan, and there's only a couple of banks around doing portfolios now. So you can do this. I think I'm seeing a couple different ways, Gina, to help you. Is one is you could put a threshold where it's an as-is sale, and the seller will be up to, will give a credit up to $5,000, and or it's terminated. And or you do the as-is addendum, which you have your contract, which is kind of as is. But if you put the as-is addendum attached to 43, it's as is. And that's the best way. That's what I did. And that's why I threw off this couple investors, because I said, I'm putting an as-is in vendor. I'm not going to go into this and have a party in 3 or 4 days after you have somebody come. I said, the answer is you're buying it. It's priced as is because I want the headache to go away. And so that's a better option, I think, instead of having these inspections. Just do the as. It's in the wherever you're going to find it. It's on DocuSign, and or you can find it on the state website. It's a true as is sale.
And then Mike, one of the agents mentioned, well, don't you have to disclose it to the next buyer? So
Yes.
what I like to say to my sellers, being a listing agent, the majority of the time is, at that point, we'll decide. Do we want to fix it for the bird in the hand? Or do we feel we can get more money for the house and move on to the next buyer and disclose that we're fixing this?
That's
For
correct.
the buyer at the higher price.
See, and I always want to preface, like when Kelly said that, and I always say, like, because everyone says, well, now you got to tell everybody about it. But the problem that they miss is if asked. How many agents are saying, hey, why'd that deal fall apart? Some will, it fell apart because of financing. It fell apart because of this or that.
I always ask that though.
Yeah.
I mean, as a, I'm going in for my buyer and I see that it was under contract.
Right.
I want to know why it fell apart. And if that agent wants to sell the property,
Right. They don't have to tell you that though.
I know they don't, but I mean, they want to sell the property, so they are disclosing it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of provisions that come up, and one of the other things, and we'll just tiptoe into it because obviously you can have a whole dance party around this, is how much weight do you put on another inspection that took place on a property? And it will rate it from 0 to 10. And Kelly, I'll let you go first because I think you asked that question, and it's good to ask that. But if you ask that seller's agent, hey, can I have a copy of that report? Would you give that to your buyer?
So some will, they'll go back to their, I guess, the buyer who paid for the inspection, to ask if it's okay to share it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll read over it. I won't talk to my buyer about it. I do recommend that they get their own inspection and then compare the two.
Yeah. Always good to get your own inspection. The reason for it is from my experience in the years in the business, every inspector has his hot and cold items. They might have had more of a plumbing background or electrical background, or maybe got involved with the structure, whatever their aha was, what they were good at, that's what you saw. That's usually where you see most of the inspection summary reports, like this and that. They always have an opinion. But unless you're using an engineer, I mean, I would definitely not put any weight on, and I tell buyers this, I said, listen, everybody sees something differently. And the problem is on the liability part, if you make the decision, say, listen, somebody paid $400 or $500 for this inspection. Would you like to use it? You know, everyone's looking to save money, but if they take your advice and they get that inspection and they use it and they find one item that wasn't identified on that list, they are going back to you.
Mhm.
And that's why you always suggest with that. And then even if you give them a copy of the report, saying this report was purchased by somebody else for your, you know, for your view and informational purposes only, but I highly recommend that you have your own report because somebody else may see this report entirely different. So put that disclosure, and you definitely want to have something in writing. And I'm not saying a text, I'm saying you get an email that exactly what I just said is, this is for informational purposes only, but I still would highly suggest you get your own report, because you can't take that away, because they're going to forget they had that conversation if they find that, you know, something else after they've been in the house for 6 months. So, you know, just tread careful on these. And I'm not, you know, I'm not painting it like we're in landfills every day, you know, landmines, but we are. we're tiptoeing around the landmines, and those landmines all are E&O trouble points. So trying to limit as much of our liability is why we want to spend time with this. And I know it's a little early. Any questions from where we are right now? Because I'm going to probably wrap it up in about 5 minutes.
I do, Mike. So
Go
I
ahead.
just want to be clear. So if we have a home inspection on our property, and we're the listing side,
Right.
and the deal falls apart, buyer backs out. If the other agent asks to see that inspection report, are you saying, yes, we must give it to them?
No, I'm
No.
saying it's the seller's discretion whether he advises,
Okay,
she
so
advises
just
to give
tell
it to you. You don't have any authorization to give some information that could be detrimental to a property. In fact, the seller could sue you probably for that.
Okay.
Lawyer would be able, she'll tell you they can sue you.
Good. Now, if we're given knowledge that there's a horizontal crack in the basement, there's a structural problem here, buyer backs out. Now, we have knowledge of that. That's something that we must disclose or
No
answer
question
sellers
about
to.
In fact, I'll give you, I remember sitting in a class for an E&O with a E&O inspector, and it was interesting because, see, now you know a material fact on the property.
Right.
On our E&O insurance, you know that we're required to physically view this crawl space, physically view the attic. We're supposed to be looking, even though we're not. I've been in court enough times with agents over the last 35 years. You know, in 5 minutes that you're a licensed realtor and you're not an inspector. However, the 2 years or 3 years building up to that with definitions, they're asking for anything that could be used against you that you may say. And that's going to be one of those things. So if you didn't disclose a material fact in the property, you're culpable at that point.
Right.
So, and more so, if you know that you list a property and you know it had a structural crack, now you're culpable as well, that you're going to be most likely sued. So you have to be really careful about material facts. And what are the best ways to do it? You know, you call an engineering company, you start getting some quotes, you get some, you know, it's very easy to do. I mean, you could overcome a lot of things at a house. I mean, you know, we had one recently in Haddon Heights. The seller's wall was actually bowing in. The seller refused to fix it. And then on top of that, the reason why, he took out the previous owner, who was a flipper, removed the wall, a structural wall, and it put a lot of extra pressure on the rear wall. And we had to exit. And ironically enough, the buyer was not a structural engineer, but an engineer in an engineer in another type of industry. She goes, they have to fix it. I said, they don't have to fix it. I said, we're not going to buy the house unless they fix it. And it was only about a $3,000, $2,800 repair. This seller just said, no way. Because I'll stay in the house. And he stayed there. And I don't know what's happened, Jen, because once you're out of the deal, you kind of like, it's gone. You toss it away like a bad deck of cards.
So Mike, just to be clear,
Yeah.
if we have a material fact about a property,
Gotta disclose.
You're saying only if we're asked?
No.
No.
If you know listing a property, you got a material fact on the property, you should be saying, I'm not going to list the house.
Right. Or he should, so now we should ask our seller to put that in the disclosure.
Well, in the disclosure or go into the process of remediating that and putting that in the remarks that there's a structural concern.
Okay,
It's
disclose.
Gina, I mean, it's like one of these things where it's, you know, there's, you know, and I think I've said this before. I mean, you just remember things over the years. Like people ask, like, why are there certain things in the you know, in the contract? Like one of them specifically is, why does it say sod? Did you ever see it? Did you ever read the contract and it says sod included?
Mhm.
Okay. And I remember this happening to my dad. This is like in the early to mid 80s. Somebody bought a house in Sturbridge Lakes. I don't know if everyone knows where Sturbridge Lakes is. And that's it was a lake community. They had used mulch, and then they used to buff it around with sod. Well, the seller put the sod down to sell his house, and at close, the day before closing, he rolled it all up and took it with him.
Oh my
And
gosh.
you know, who does this stuff? People. I mean, so there's reasons why all that stuff's in the contract is because people did really dumb things. And you know, it's inconceivable, but there's a reason, because now you get into the contract, it's as they saw it. You know, it wasn't what they perceive it, it's how they saw it. They saw it with green grass, and it's like, you know,
That's crazy.
even in the summer, remember we had all those heat waves? I had like, you know, good friends reloading, and I would drive by their house and say, hey, listen, could you do me a favor? People saw the grass green. I know you don't want to spend $100 in water. I said, but you better turn the sprinkler system on. He goes, well, I shut it off to save money. I sold the house. I said, they saw the house with green grass. If I bring them in the middle of July or August with brown grass, you might be given an invoice. So what can you say? There's a lot of reasons why those provisions are set forth in the contract. So, but Gina, just to make it totally clear, crystal clear, is you see in material facts, even if the house was never listed before, you have to identify it with the seller, because the seller is never going to tell you that they change their carpet every time it rains in the basement.
Yeah, that's how we understood it. I just heard you say only if asked, and I wanted
That
to
was
be clear with the team.
that was in reference to Kelly when she was going, if she went after if a house came back on the market after it was pending, she would always ask why, and that's a good reason to ask why. You know.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, and that's what I don't know if I said, like I have one I was talking earlier with when the lenders were on. I don't know if you were still on the call. Like, you know, it's a cash or conventional HOA where this is. They're not approved FHA, and these lenders are just taking the mortgage applications, and they say, well, I got a couple dings on my credit, but I can do it FHA, and then they think they're going to get an exemption, and 9 times out of 10 they can't. You might get that one HOA that might say, we'll give you the paperwork, but they don't want to. If they're either in compliance for FHA or they're not. So I'm one, I'd rather know up front. You disclose it. It's cash or conventional. It's not FHA. And I can get an exemption from my guy. I'm like, okay, you can't. So because we've already, we did this twice with this one. So anyway, so that's that. We covered open policies, open public records. Just be careful. No, when we walk away from this phone call, if you go to the township and they tell you the sky's red today, when they go back and they investigate it, they might say the sky's a different color, because they're not responsible or culpable for anything they say or do. You can't sue them, but they can sue us. So just all be careful, and feel free to call Jim or I, because these are questions that come up in our line of work every day, where we're trying to help everybody keep our noses clear. One thing for certain, I'll share with everybody on this call, and I see it happening. In fact, they had it on this other house, because I love to use Supras. Why I use the Supra is Supras. I know who comes in, I know who goes out. Bless you. So I had a couple realtors call me, and they say, hey, where's the lockbox? I have my client at the house. And I'm like, well, that's great. I said, well, why aren't you there? She goes, well, I don't have a Supra. I just want to give them the information. So this is the stuff that's going on right now. So limit your liability, because when I spoke to a real estate commissioner about, I guess it's like 4 weeks ago now, one of the biggest problems they're having with people right now is buyers are giving the keys to a property prior to them owning it. And they are coming down on realtors because they're like, you know, even if you go do a pre-inspection, say, you know, sometimes you want to say, hey, here's the key, you're going to closing in an hour. You can't give them that key until they close. And a lot of times we're in a precarious situation because we can't even go to closing. But you got to make sure that you take the keys to the closing clerk. You can leave them there in an envelope and say, when this closes, you can give them the keys. You just can't give them the keys in advance. And the commissioner was really, she goes, it's happening so many times we can't handle the flood of complaints, because if anything happens where that doesn't close, that seller now has lost access to his property because the buyer has the keys. And how do you get rid of somebody that something happened to their loan, it didn't go together, maybe a deal fell apart subsequently beforehand, we don't know all that, there's always different reasons, but just be careful about that. Never give a buyer the set of keys until they close. All right. Work with our lenders, work with our title companies. They'll make sure that we're covered, just so we can make sure we limit our liability and keep our nose clean with the real estate commission. All righty. Anything else? And we'll wrap it up. We good?
Good, thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Hey, listen, let's hope we don't get any more snow, right? I think
Oh, that's happening. All week it's happening.
I heard the same thing. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate what the the questions that you guys come up with periodically. It keeps me on my toes. It's nice. And I'll talk to you soon. All right. Have a great
Right,
day.
thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye now.
Take care.